Okay, here we go. Nice and quiet.
Sound speeds, camera rolling.
Holding for sound.
Last looks. Calling for last looks.
And set, and action.
I need to swap batteries.
You know, making movies is hard.
Making movies is hard.
Welcome to Making Movies is Hard, the podcast about the struggle of being an independent filmmaker. I'm Arquette.
I'm Liz Manischel.
This week we have writer, producer Eugene Kotlyarenko on the show to talk about his latest film, Spree, starring Joe Keery, Sasheer Zamata, Mischa, Barton, and David Arquette.
And I would just say the best thing you can do, as long as you can do it, is to make movies with people that you like and people that you trust and people that, you know, hopefully you're friends with. In that way, at least, you know, like everyone's heart is in the right place.
Eugene tells us how, after directing 4 features, that he was able to get Spree made and what it was like to work on a different scale than his previous films. But before we get to Eugene...
Let's talk about the news.
Yes, let's talk about the news.
Listen to me. Television is not the truth. We'll tell you anything you want to hear. We lie like hell.
So this is an article from No Film School about streamers and how they are king right now, and how basically they're just gaining more and more popularity. Like all these people are just kind of focusing on streaming these new. Well, then there's a bunch of new ones too, right? Like HBO Max just came out. Disney Plus is pretty new.
Peacock.
And then Peacock just came out. I didn't get Peacock. I have like all the other ones, you know. And then Hulu, Netflix. They're all just, everyone is flocking to these services. I mean, didn't Hulu pay like the highest number for a single film for what's it called? Palm Springs from Sundance this year or something? Isn't that like a thing? So just that in alone, it's like that used to be like a big studio that would release it in theaters, and now it's a streamer who's like throwing out big money for stuff. So basically, this article just talks about how, like, when the pandemic is over, whenever that is, years, right? Like, then they just don't think that movie theaters can really recover and that they're really going to take over. That streaming is here to stay and they're going to be the kings forever. And just in context, like, theaters are supposed to be opening today around the country. It's like August 20th right now. And, you know, in my area, they're not open. There's no AMC's open. They're just still closed. I'm sure in Los Angeles it's the same. So I don't know.
So as filmmakers, for years we were like, oh, we want a theatrical run, right? And a lot of us felt pushed out of that, like we didn't get the opportunity to have theatrical run. But then there were things like Tug and Gather and booking an art house theater yourself. Like there are all these ways where you could get to the audience directly through theatrical. Yeah, so streaming is king or queen or whatever, lord of the manor. But like filmmakers are being pushed out. And we're getting less and less power yet again because we don't have that opportunity to book an art house theater anymore because it's a pandemic. And we're not going to get any license fee if we're on iTunes. So it's like we're just yet again powerless. This will tie into our player soundbite, but it's just like super lame. I have my pessimist pants on right now. Yeah, you can tell. It's my I think last week I was like, everything's fine. We'll just like protect the buildings of the art houses for a few years until they get back on their feet. And now I'm like, we're all screwed.
And drive-ins are great and all, but I don't think, like, it's not the same. I don't think you can just rent a drive-in for your art house movie, right? Like,
I think it'd be unlikely to play an indie dramedy with no cast at a drive-in, which probably has like, I don't know, maybe there's like very obscure times for a drive-in. I don't know actually how that schedule works. So maybe you could have like a 3 p.m. like think film on and you could make some money. You're right. There is possibly some hope in the drive-in sphere right now.
I don't know. I wonder if they're even open to that. We haven't talked to any drive-in people, so we don't know.
We should get one on. That would be great.
You're right. Traditionally, it's been like horror movies, you know, genre movies that play at drive-ins, and that's what are doing really well right now, are all those types of movies. Who knows what's going on? I mean, I was talking to my producer yesterday, and he was saying, like, oh, there's still a chance that the alternate could get, like, a limited theatrical maybe next year sometime. Really? Our theater is going to be open next year?
I think so. The forecasting in my mind has, a lot of people have been saying vaccine by the new year.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And again, I mean, like, I'm not a broadcast journalist. Like, I'm not going to like state this news for people to take seriously. But like next year, if we do have a vaccine, sure, I think a limited theatrical run is very possible. I'm also just thinking about other trickle down problems of the quarantine. I got a notice from the Half Initiative last week, which is Ryan Murphy's mentorship program. And they basically were saying they want to reduce liability for all productions until the new year. And so they're just putting a moratorium on getting back to applicants and curating who gets in because of the pandemic. And then I'm also thinking of like HBO All Access and WB Television Directors Program. Like they seem to be going for it. And I only know that because I got rejected by them. So like, it's very interesting what programs feel comfortable going forward, bringing in mentors, shadowing opportunities, getting on-set experience. Like you've been doing commercials, right?
Yeah.
So like those have been going forward, but like indie productions, I still have heard very few stories.
So the DP for my movie, The Alternate, is on a movie right now. You know, it's a 20-day indie feature, but it's like so low budget it's not even SAG, so they're following all the COVID guidelines, but they didn't test the whole crew or anything. They're just doing like temperature checks, they're doing masks and all the basic protocols, but without the testing. Which seems like a little crazy, but since, you know, they're a crew of 10, I don't know, they're all just like basically quarantining themselves and not like going out and not doing things and being with lots of people. So I don't know, I guess it works. I was talking to my producer about this too. It's just like the cost for indie film to do the three days a week testing that SAG requires for the whole crew. It's just really cost prohibitive because it's like $150 a day times 20 times 3, so times 3 on top of that, because it's like 3 days a week, if
you live in Los
weeks.
Angeles, I thought this is a California thing, maybe it's a California thing, but it's like you get free COVID testing, right? But is there a limit on that? And that's like you have to wait in line for hours.
But you can't if you have to test the crew and you have to get rapid results, you can't do it that way, right? So I did some research, and because actually I texted John Schneider, you know, who was on the show, and he sent me to somebody else, and then they gave me a cost of $150 per person per test, and then you also have to have somebody.
Not 150, but
150.
Oh
yeah.
My God,
yeah,
that's insane.
Yeah, because we did it last week, and it was $200 for one actor, but that was just like a standalone one person. We just sent him to an office, and he did it. But yeah, I guess if you're doing it on set, it's $150 per person, and then you also have to pay the person to be there. So that's probably what, like, if they're going to be there for 3 hours testing everybody when they arrive, that's like what, at least $300, maybe $200 if you're lucky. So, you know, if you do all that math, right, it's like 200 times 3, 150 times 20 times 3 times 3. It's like probably $20,000 or something already.
It's impossible for these smaller productions. Yeah.
So you really have to either like work that into your budget or you just wait. But then like, how long are we gonna wait? Like, you're probably still gonna have to do like I can't imagine SAG not having these same protocols for at least, you know, through 2021, right? Like, no matter what happens, like I can't imagine they're gonna pull back on those rules unless it's just like all is well and there's no problem anymore. But that's not going to happen, right?
If there's a vaccine, which I really don't know when, right? None of us know when. I think that would inspire a pullback, right? Because there's an opportunity.
Right. You think if there's a vaccine that like they'll just like, oh, no more restrictions, we're good now.
They'll definitely have restrictions, but like the 3 times a week COVID testing, I don't know if that would be...
If everyone gets vaccinated, then maybe
it's a vaccination requirement. Yeah. I mean, which seems also interesting and like a massive can of worms for this state specifically. But yes, that's very interesting.
Yeah. No, anyways, lots to digest there. I don't know. I just want to work, man. Like, I want to be able to go make movies and get back on set. And I see other people doing it, and it makes me excited that there's a future where I could be back on set again too. But, you know, yeah, there's going to be a lot of money behind it, I guess, for it to actually happen.
And I am not hopeful, and I am depressed, and I have my sad pants on.
I have my sad pants on right now too, Liz, but I'm trying to like not have the sad pants. Guess what? Maybe this will make us all happy. We've got mail, Liz.
My breath catches in my chest until I hear 3 little words. You got mail.
So this week we have a new review. It is titled Love This Podcast with an exclamation point. 5 stars by R.P. Mac Escrees from August 5th. And I'm pretty sure that's Rebecca Escrees, who is
Rebecca
on our
Escrees.
show.
Yeah,
Escrees.
she's one of my genuinely closest friends in life.
Oh, nice.
So,
amazing.
This is a very biased, kind review. But yes, let's pretend like it's a stranger. And if you want to read it, we'll pretend like we're reacting to a stranger.
Rebecca says, or R.P. Mac Escrees says, I've listened to this podcast on and off for years. I think the show has really evolved into a professional and honest podcast. The hosts are fun, period. The guests are honest, period. No blowhards, Hollywood gloss, or celebrity wannabes. Just an honest conversation about what it means to be a regular person working hard to make movies. I love it.
Stranger. That was very nice of you. Thank you, stranger.
Yeah, thank you, RP Mac. I love Mac as like just a name, so RP Mac. Moving forward, do you have something to say? You can send us a question or a comment or a suggestion to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. Or if you like the show like Rebecca did or does, you can leave us a review on iTunes or Spotify, or not Spotify. Not Spotify. You can leave us a review on iTunes or any of the other places you can leave reviews for podcasts, like Stitcher, for instance. Stitcher's a place.
If you really love the show and want to support us, go on over to patreon.com/MMIH podcast and contribute any level, $1, $5, $9, whatever you'd like. We have a cool enameled pin to send your way. And we also wanted to shout out to our new Patreon, wonderful individual, Curtis Ratliff, who I actually don't know Curtis, so I feel like this could be a real Patreon who's like, yeah, I want to support this podcast. Do you know Curtis?
I do not know Curtis. Thank you, Curtis. Much
appreciated. This is like our first stranger. So we're like in love with Curtis Ratliff right now.
Yes, thank you, Curtis.
And lastly, make sure to jump over to our Instagram, click the link in our bio. We have that brand new YouTube page. You can subscribe and actually please subscribe. Not just you can subscribe, but please subscribe. We're trying to reach 100 subscribers by September. So every single subscription means something. And we've been doing a lot of video content in our interviews. And so you get to see what we look like. You get to see what our guests look like. You get to see me awkwardly ignore my dog pulling at my shoes. You get to see all these really super exciting things that you wouldn't be able to if you just listened to us. Thrilling times ahead.
But it's time for Get Shorty.
So you make movies, huh?
I produce feature motion pictures.
I got an idea for a movie.
This week we have a short film written by Mary McBain and directed by Sarah Day called Spaghetti. And I'm not going to say anything else about this movie. You should watch it now. I want people's pure reactions to this without any, prompting. But here is Mary to talk about the film.
Okay, I made a short instead of any other kind of medium because I wanted this to be watched by younger audiences, primarily teenagers who are going through sex education right now and perhaps embarking on their first sexual experiences. And I know that short form media is more digestible for that age range, so that's why we went with that. Why this story? Well, I decided to do something on this subject because I'd had an experience in 2018 with someone in Los Angeles that turned out to be a really unpleasant experience. And I asked if I could meet with him afterwards to talk about it. And when I raised the subject, he got very angry and said that it wasn't an issue of consent because I'd never said the word no. And so I started to look into that and asked a lot of my female friends and other people in this industry, and so many people had had the same exact experience. So I wanted to do something that didn't point fingers, that didn't victimize, but that was a thought piece, that when you watch this, it might make you think next time you're in that situation, whichever side of the coin you're on. And I wanted to do it in a neutral way so that it wasn't more uncomfortable for either side of it to watch. The funds, I'd started a production company last year in London, and we were able to come up with a small amount of funds, but it wasn't quite enough to make the whole film. So Dan Berman, who I made the film with, suggested that we go with an all-female crew, and not just a 50-50 like had been started to be a movement, but go full female shooting crew. So we put out an advert asking for female crew members to come along, and it was amazing. We had so many people contact us wanting to be a part of this, and everyone was willing to give their time for free. We did have to pay for editing, and that came from the budget, and we did have to pay for one of the locations, and again, that came from that budget. But the rest of the crew donated their time. And in fact, in one of the interviews when we were talking to one of the women, she said that if we did come up with funds to pay her, she actually didn't want to get paid because this had happened to her before and she didn't have a voice. And being able to work on this project gave her a voice, which was amazing. And it ended up, we had 23 women shooting this, and it was one of the most incredible experiences for all of us. And so much unity in there, and again, people donating their time, which in this industry is phenomenal. Okay, as far as my career is concerned, I hope that I might become known as someone who will deal with subjects that might be considered uncomfortable or taboo, but not being afraid to start conversations in those areas. I also wanted to start working more with students and with teenagers, and that's happened. That's been really exciting. So we had a group of students from a school in London who wanted to get involved with us, and so I've been working with them, and together we're looking at what's lacking in sex education and what we can add to it, and starting to design media that will be used in addition to what the schools already have within their curriculum. And also now, very recently, in fact tomorrow morning, I've got my first meeting with a group of filmmakers out here in Los Angeles who also want to become a part of this and start making media here and adding to sex education so that you can go out into the world and be ready to have a really healthy and fun time and be knowledgeable but comfortable as well. So we're trying to do things like how do you teach dominion over your own body? How do you teach someone to be confident enough with their own voice where they don't need validation from the other party, but they're confident enough to listen to their gut feeling on something? So I think that's something that's been lacking as far as I'm aware in what students are learning. So yeah, we're working on all of that. Now it's out in the world, it is serving the purpose that I hoped. It's becoming a conversation piece. This film has been on the Virgin Atlantic planes as part of the in-flight entertainment, and I've been getting a lot of feedback from that, people watching that, and then comments that I'm getting, and people that are watching it found it uncomfortable but funny to watch, and it's really making them think about past experiences and going into future ones in a different way. I picked spaghetti as the metaphor because I didn't want it to be something that was too on the nose, and I didn't want it to be something that would be too triggering to watch, because I didn't want it to be something that anyone that would watch and then shut down. So I wanted to get things in there like the big pepper grinder as a sexual innuendo, and I wanted it all to be talking around the subject so that it's easier to watch and more digestible, and so that you come away entertained but educated.
So Alrik, why this one? Why this short?
Well, so there's a few, and there's a lot of shorts that I like that we got sent, but this one I liked specifically because it was short. It's very short and sweet. It's like 4 minutes or something, and I liked how off the wall it was and how it really embraced its own sense of style in a really nice way. And I liked like the style and the direction and the flow of the short, and I loved how far they pushed the concept. And it's a really, kind of a bizarre concept. I think the way that they use it to get their message across, but I think it worked really well. And so that's sort of why I wanted to talk about it.
Humor always works better for message films, and this is very clearly a message film. That's how it won me over. I also enjoyed the duration, and I like that the jokes weren't like super obvious. It was either like a visual joke or a joke in the dialogue. It didn't seem to like push this analogy over the top. I can't stop thinking about this one image, and it's of the girl wiping her mouth and it looks like red, and you would think, oh, marinara sauce, haha, pasta. And then you take a second and you're like, oh, that pasta did not have marinara sauce. And then you start thinking, wow, this is really dark. This is like a very substantial short that comes in light and comes in very absurd, but then it did stay with me. So yes, a good message about silence is not consent, a good tone, well executed, a little silly at first, and then, well worth the time you watch it.
I love the shots of they're just jamming pasta into their mouths. It's really gross. That was something I did in one of my short films. We had a pasta scene where they were eating, and I used a couple of the shots, but I was kind of like convinced not to because it was so gross the way that they were jamming food into their mouths. But then I realized after I made the movie that was the point. It's supposed to be gross. you gotta like embrace it, and I really appreciated how they really embraced the grossness of some of those parts, because it really worked to to get their point across.
Yeah, their pasta budget. I mean, that was a lot of pasta.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And then the way that they just mess it all up at the end, where it's like all the empty pasta everywhere in the last frame, it's good.
Yeah, if you want to share your short with the world and you would like us to talk about it, we mentioned earlier, just email us, podcast@makingmoviesishard.com, and we're actively and always looking for shorts to promote, because there's not a lot of venues to just promote a short. And also make sure you're checking out the shorts themselves when you're listening to us, and we share them on our website. Maybe we'll find ways to directly link from the YouTube videos to the shorts. But now we have the player.
What about truth? What about the reality?
What about the way the old ending tested in Canoga Park?
So this week we talked to two lady filmmakers, and we asked them how do they think the pandemic has and will continue to impact the film industry. So let's hear from my wonderful friend Lily Gareth, amazing filmmaker as well, and then superb actress Marcia Haufrecht.
This is Lily Gareth Cunningham, and I'm a micro-budget indie writer-director. So I am pretty optimistic about the future of filmmaking during and after the pandemic. I think temporarily we're going to continue to see a sort of crisis and a sort of mess of navigation, nobody really knowing how to function, and the old way of making movies will definitely be permanently altered. But I don't think that's a bad thing. In terms of stories, I think we'll see a return to smaller casts, character-driven films, crews who are in the same geographic location, able to quarantine together out of necessity. I think for a while we'll see establishment indie films, higher $1 million indies, will probably be eliminated. But scrappy non-union DIYers will find a way, and I think we'll start to see more films from other areas of the country that are usually reserved only for regional film festivals, especially with virtual film festivals. I'm really excited about that. And I'm also looking forward to seeing how isolation affects the stories we want to tell. So I also think art house theaters won't survive in physical form, but I think the culture will survive. I think we'll start to see more multi-purpose event spaces because of rent costs. So there will be sort of a screening concert bar sort of venue, which is sad but exciting. So I think there will be a major destructive shift with an inevitable renaissance.
My name is Marcia Haufrecht. I'm an actress, writer, director, filmmaker, and a painter. I'm allowed to be all those things because I'm 83 years old. I believe in regard to the future of our industry in this pandemic, new techniques will probably be developed to make Zoom a new creative medium. I think content will be more inclusive thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement, and perhaps there'll be less sex content as we know it thanks to social distancing. Content may also deepen. I think art houses may ultimately have a greater chance of survival because of these issues. I don't think indies will suffer. If anything, they may thrive. In this age of great difficulty, necessity is the mother of invention, and that's creativity.
Eugene, thank you for being on the show. The first of our rapid fire questions is, how many days did you shoot Spree?
20 days. There was, what ended up in the final film, there were these sort of exercises that Joe and I did to help him get into character, and which was before principal photography over the course of 2 months, actually. And then there were some fun adventures that Joe and David Arquette and I had to get them to have like a sort of father-son history, and a little bit of that ended up in the movie. And kind of these things sort of ended up in the opening montage, mostly what I'm talking about. And then once we realized what the opening montage would be, we did like just Joe and myself and a friend went out and did like a half a day of pickups to get more like sort of social media stuff. But 20 principal photography days with a crew and all that.
And what was the rough budget of the film?
I don't really want to get into it, but I'll say this. It's like more than 10 times the budget of my other movies, which were made for, $50,000 to $70,000. And I think every sort of stupid exec meeting I have post this movie, when I tell them the budget, they're like, no fucking way. Because, we shut the freeway down in the movie. We had like 25 stunt drivers. We did stunts on Hollywood Boulevard. We had, spoiler alert, we have trained dogs to kill, like whatever, Mischa, Barton and Frankie Grande and stuff. So.
It's kind of a trip. There's a stunt at the end I want to talk to you about, but we'll save that for later.
How long did you spend working on the film from the inception to now, to its release?
So my co-writer, Gene McHugh, came to me with the idea of a movie about a rideshare driver who goes on a murderous rampage, and to do it as a sort of minimalist horror film in like late 2015. And we sort of started like noodling around with that script for maybe like half a year, and I was just like, like what ideology is driving this person? And we kind of tooled around with a few things, like should we start taking down like white male supremacy, right? Or something that is like that sort of ideology, or like, should we start taking down something else? And then sort of just came to us like, actually, what if he's just truly driven by the likes, the thirst for attention? And that felt so universal and so relatable. And ultimately, when we were working on this as a sort of like takedown of alt-right sort of stuff, I was like, all of these people, these mass murderers, like these spree killers, are just driven by the same thing that, like wannabe influencers are driven by, sort of like need to be the center of a narrative, the need to command like attention from the culture. And it just felt like we could encapsulate like a much larger critique if we did that. So then once we had that, we really like pumped out the script, and then you go around, you try to raise money, and everyone's like, the execs you meet with, they're like, oh my God, I love this. This is so good. Let me just talk to my boss, but like this is going to happen. And it doesn't, and you have like a zillion meetings like that and nothing happens and blah, blah, blah. And then you do finally meet someone or multiple kind of, ultimately in this film, we had 2 different EPs. We had the money in place by like the end of 2018, beginning of 2019. And then we filmed in March 2019. And then we're kind of done with the edit by kind of October 2019. And then we went to Sundance in 2020. I don't know. So like, like 4 years, I guess. And then after Sundance, I went back and I was like, I got to change a few things before we put it out.
Shit, wow.
So I probably worked another, just like kind of on my own, another 2.5 months after Sundance on it as well.
And then how big was your crew on the film?
So it was, for me, pretty big. On like a driving day, I think we had roughly like 20, 25 people. And then on like some of the bigger days, like the comedy club or the freeway chase and stuff, we had more closer to like 40.
Compared to all the other projects you've made, how difficult was this one? And my follow-up, which I really want to hear about, is how did you leverage your other films in order to increase the budget of this one? So if you could compare the difficulty, but also talk about maximizing everything you've done to get here.
So I think the name of the podcast, right, I think is very accurate, right? It's making movies is hard, but also extremely fun. And like, I think if your approach to filmmaking is like, there are going to be a lot of fucking challenges and obstacles, and all of that just needs to be a kind of like an opportunity to be creative, then I think it isn't really hard. It's just time consuming, but hopefully you're having like fun doing it, you know, and hopefully like you're okay just eating like tuna fish and drinking water as like the only thing you can afford while you're, you know, making your independent film. How much harder was it? Well, one thing that was a little harder actually was working with like a real crew. And like, this is my 5th movie. This is my first time that I've worked with an assistant director. I've never had one before. And, you know, my first time working with like sort of producers who have experience producing stuff. Whereas in the past it was like, hey, you're my close friend that I trust. Will you like help me produce a movie even though you know nothing about like the processes of filmmaking? Actually, one thing that was a little harder was like sort of like ceding control over like the schedule and the way things should be run. Even though there actually was a lot of improv in the film, and I encourage that, being less improvisational with like how the day goes. I mean, on one hand, I'm like kind of a control freak. And on another hand, like I pick people, performers, because they have a certain like energy that I want to make sure I capture in the film. And in the past, I feel like sometimes I can see performers doing something that the scene like is constraining them in. And so then we kind of like reconfigure that. And in this film is way harder because, you know, it's a genre film and you are constrained by the car and you want to have a route, you have a fucking permit for your route and all this stuff. Not that we didn't improvise. I actually think we did a lot of like sort of on the fly things that were really interesting. And Joe and actually all the actors were really kind of masterful in how they kind of organically started improvising. Anyway, to answer your question, it was harder that I'm a control freak and I had to kind of, you know, really, you know, collaborate in a way that I felt healthy about, you know, because I do think that's one of the best parts of filmmaking, to collaborate and get people great ideas and stuff. But people don't always have great ideas, you know. Sometimes people's ideas are wrong, and sometimes people's ideas make scenes worse and stuff. And I don't really mean the actors. I'm talking more about like the crew now and stuff. And I do believe that everyone on the crew should have like a voice, and if they have an idea, share it. But yeah, that was harder. The other movies I shot in 7 days, my other films, my 2 previous films. But it was way more like intense. Actually, one of the hardest things was like, these were usually between 10 and 14-hour days on spree. And afterwards, I was like, what do I do now? Like, you know, because on the other movies, I had like, you know, like 16, 18-hour days and stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to like pass out now. But like, I was like, what do I do now? And I would just like go and look at the script and like prep the scenes, do my little storyboards. After the first week, I could go into the edit room with the AE and the editor. But the movie was so complicated because there were so many angles that I couldn't even really look at footage because they were just sort of trying to figure out how to fucking multicam everything and stuff. Anyway, I don't really know if I'm answering your question, but these are some of the things that are kind of different in the process.
The question behind the question was like, what do you recommend for other filmmakers who were in the micro budget space to get to that next step? It's a more of a long view question.
So, okay, like every previous movie I made was made out of like desperation, right? So like my cycle of whatever life the last 13 years is take shitty corporate job or job in, you know, on a set, take whatever you can get where you can like maximize like the amount of money you can get. Live extremely frugally as you do this. Actually live extremely frugally your entire life. Like I did not take a vacation throughout my entire 20s, you know. Finish doing that job after 6 to 9 months. Okay, you should have enough money saved up so you can write a script, or come home from that job and write a script every night. Okay. Hopefully it does not take you years to write your script. Hopefully it takes you a year. I think a year is really reasonable. 6 months is awesome. A month is awesome if you can do it. Whatever, you know, as fast as you can. Okay, now you have this script. Okay. Have you ever met a person involved with filmmaking, or do you follow someone, or does someone follow you back online? DM them, call them, email them and say, hey, I have this script. Like, would you mind reading it? Hey, like, okay. Anyone involved in the industry, if you've written anything new or interesting or provocative, will say, oh, cool. No thanks. Sorry. No. Okay. So then that's what happened to me. So after a certain point, you're like, I'm running out of money. I'm running out of time. Okay. Now you have to think, have I ever met a rich person? Have I ever met a rich person who has nothing to do with movies, who has no idea that
I don't know any better. Yeah.
who has no idea that you quote unquote can't make a movie for $50,000, because every person involved in the film industry will tell you you're fucking crazy. Okay. I, when I moved to Los Angeles, basically decided very early on, for better or worse, that I did not gel well with the like industry film people. So I did not hang out with any of them. I ended up hanging out with people in the art world, musicians and artists. In the art world, if you go to these art events, you will always meet rich people. And some of them are actually not scumbags. Obviously, some are, whatever. Also, there are poor scumbags and middle-class scumbags as well in this world. Okay, so, but regardless, just make it, try to make an impression on said person with capital and put them in a Rolodex, put them in a Google Drive sheet, Google Sheet. And when you are in this desperate place where you need to want to make something, and you might have a germ of an idea, you go to that spreadsheet and you email all those people on the same day. And you say, hey, you remember me, blah, blah, blah. I'm actually a filmmaker and I'm trying to make a movie right now. And I would love for you to be involved if you're interested in something like that, And 90% of the people won't respond to you. 9% of them will respond, sorry, no. And 1% of them will say, yeah, like, what is it all about? You're trying to make a small movie, right? Because if they're in the art world and they're rich, they're probably already spending several $100,000s a year on art, if not more, on pieces of art. So you have to this is almost like and they do that, as a financial investment, but also to feel cool. And so if you present your movie as something that could make them feel cool, it's a similar mentality, as long as it doesn't make a real dent in their whatever. Then you tell them when they say, yeah, what is it all about? You have to be like, oh shit, like what, what should I do? Because the script you wrote cannot be made for $50,000. The scripts that I had been writing were like the size of Spree, like something that you need like $1 million or maybe more to make. All right. So then I'm like, what are the resources around me? Like, what do I have? What can I tell a story about really quickly, really cheaply, and could be interesting? And so that is why, like, my last two films, A Wonderful Cloud and Wobble Palace, are both relationship comedies. They both largely involve like places that I live or go to or my friends live, and involve people who are in my sort of like, extended personal social network that I think are just compelling and, performative naturally. And so, you come up with your idea because it helps to have a deadline where someone says, yeah, I could maybe give you money. Like, that's inspirational. I think everyone, can probably concede that being on a deadline or having some sort of like, fire under your ass is really helpful with creativity. And so, you come up with the idea, you tell the person double, you work out what you think your budget should be, then you tell them double what you think your budget should be, and then they give you half. And then you have your budget. Right. And this has worked like every time. And then they give you half. And then you just have to figure out how to do it. And I think most independent, directors, writer-directors, like, you're probably also producing your own film. So you just figure it out. You do as fast as you can. You get people to help you, blah, 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 blah. I'll say this. Okay, so those two films both went to South by. After Wobble, I got an agent. An agent sets you up with meetings to go and meet with execs and industry people. I met with probably 40 people for Spree. Every company passed. I would say that 5 of them seriously considered it, including Annapurna, including Basilev's, which is the company that does those, like Unfriended movies and stuff. And ultimately they all passed too. And literally it was exactly the same scenario as before. Someone reached out to me and said, hey, my boyfriend just saw Wobble Palace, right, which is my last movie, and really likes it. And if you're going to make another movie, he'd like to get involved. And I was like, oh, well, what does he do? Like, I was assuming he wanted to work in the art department or something. And then they're like, and then she was like, yeah, he'd want to like, invest or like, produce it. And I was like, oh, he would like to invest. Like, that's cool. Well, yeah, I'm actually trying to make a movie right now. Like, can I send him the script? She's like, sure. So I sent him the script. We had the meeting, same exact thing. Ask for double, you get half. And I mean, he liked the script. He trusted me. He knows I can do this, sort of thing. We got along well, all that stuff. then you get half and it's like, okay, I'm making the movie. And then I was like, wow, we're going to have to do all sorts of stunts and complicated things on this film that I've never done before. I should get like, producers who have a little bit more experience involved. And so I got this producer, John Lang, who had done some genre films. He brought a line producer, Krista Barini, who had also done some films with him. And they put together a budget. So I put together my budget the way I normally do. And I was like, perfect, I'm good with the money I got from the first investor. I'm going to go do this. Then they came on and they're like, actually, we probably need double what you have. And I was like, what? No, I would have asked for 4 times. Anyway, so then we needed to find another investor, blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, so I hope that's like a little bit interesting, the genealogy.
Can we back up a little bit just to like the John Lang part? Because this is the trick, right? Like I know a lot of people who have had money and went off to make movies, but then when they're trying to find their John Lang, they don't find them, or they find somebody who doesn't have as much experience. So can you just talk to how you found that person?
Yeah. Well, John Lang, was one of the people at those 5 companies who I had met with and pitched, and who was a champion of the movie, but then just didn't work out. He had, in between my meeting and that point, had left that company and went independent. And actually, the exact same thing happened with the other producers. Sumaya Kaveh, who was the Annapurna, she was a champion of the script and tried to get it made there. Didn't work out, and she had left Annapurna, and she formed another company with a former colleague of hers, Matt Budman, and they came on as the other producers who brought in the other capital. I don't exactly like living in LA. It's not a city after my own heart in terms of just like, it's not super walkable. Obviously with COVID, every city is sort of the same at this point, but before, it's just a different style of life and vibe. My proximity to the industry basically meant nothing for my first 10 years out here. I would say the main benefit was that I was able to work with some very talented technicians and artistic craftspeople who would get paid very well for working on commercials and kind of big movies that they didn't like. And then I'd say, hey, are you free for 7 days to work on me and my small movie for nothing? And they'd be like, yeah. But in this case, right, now that I had an agent, I was able to go on meetings and I was able to sort of cultivate these relationships a little bit more. It sort of finally came in handy. And so if you're looking to make a big movie and you don't, if your commitment is to, I'm out there, I have to make this script and it's a big movie and it requires serious resources and I will not say no for an answer, you probably should move to LA. I had a different approach, which is basically I want to make the scripts that I wrote. Oh, no one wants to make them. Well, I still want to make something because I have this impulse that I feel like there's some interesting stories I could still tell just kind of on the fly. And so that is why I ended up in this cycle of just making movies, not just independently, because Spree is also independent, but extremely under the radar in Hollywood.
So I have a question. You're talking about that first executive producer that you got on to get the first bit of money for Spree. That wasn't Drake or Future, was it?
That wasn't Drake or Future.
Okay. And so
Drake and Future came on through Matt and Sumaya. Their company had a first look deal with Dream Crew, which is Drake's company. And so after the script was all put together and after Matt and Sumaya were really into it, and after we had even already cast Joe and I had started making some videos with Joe in character, I put those materials together. And then we went and pitched it to Dream Crew, and they had already read the script and liked it, and they responded really well to the materials and to me, and they got it right away. So once they were on board, then it was super cool, and then we had all the money we needed, and they already, even in that first meeting, one of the Dream Crew guys, Matt Babel, was like, oh man, this stuff that you're making with Joe, we got to use this to promote the movie. Cut to 17 months later, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but we had this promotional campaign leading into the film, which is a Kurt's World 96 Instagram account, which, has 67,000 followers and a bunch of extremely fervent fans. We have a more successful social media campaign than Tenet, essentially. So statistically, obviously way more fucking people in the world know about Tenet and want to see it. but just on a numbers, to get into a Kurt Kunkle state of mind on a numbers way, we're more influential.
All right. That's so funny. Well, that's a perfect vehicle for this movie, right? To have an Instagram account. It's like a no-brainer.
Yeah, you couldn't do it with like another film organically, but for this, and a lot of the people on it were completely confused. They don't even know it's a film. It's very like, kind of Blair Witch-ish. Like they don't even know this is a film. They think it's a real person. They think it's Joe Keery taking the piss, But it's proved really effective, and that's what I was saying kind of right before we got on the call. Like you guys were like, "What are you up to?" I'm like, I'm just reading Letterboxd reviews, and it's I think literally all from people under the age of 23 who are aware of the film. Now, my sort of concern and goal now is to make people older than 23 aware of the film, because I think they are not. I think there's very little awareness of this film amongst millennials and Gen Xers and all that. And that concerns me, and I definitely want older people like me to see the film.
Can you talk a little bit about the videos you did with Joe? I mean, like a lot of us, this isn't a micro-budget film, so this is not a germane question, but the idea of going outside of your principal photography, convincing an actor to do these kind of exercises with you, and also like, were you bringing in a crew for those? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So Joe, beyond, and I think anyone who sees this film will get that he is like a magnificently talented actor with like crazy range. Beyond that, he's also just like a prince, he's just like a super sweet, nice, and dedicated person, and really thoughtful. And I think he understood the like, not only how provocative the film is, but how it had like a sort of sense of responsibility towards this subject matter. And I think he was very concerned with like getting it right. Do you know what I mean? Like, off the bat, I told him like, this is going to be the most like anti-fetishistic movie about like a murderer that you can think of. Like, I mean, this guy is a loser, and he is not someone anyone would want to emulate. Like the entire film should feel cringe kind of watching him. You might have empathy for him. You might see a little bit of your own neuroses and desperation and sort of thirstiness in him, but you will not want to be him, And I think in order to get into that headspace, Joe himself wanted to practice, and so I put together some reference points for him. Like I made like a 45-minute compilation video of this sort of people out in the world that I think are Kurt Kunkles, without the murderous aspect, but just like, imagine people who have like no followers and like 5 views on a YouTube video that is trying to advise people on how to get followers.
You're gathering like archival material or just pulling from YouTube?
No, I'm just pulling from YouTube, and I made like a video compilation for him and sent it to him. And then, I said like, shouldn't we make some of these? And actually we had a really good social media consultant on the movie, Honor Levy. And I was like, so what kind of videos should I make with Joe? And she said, do you know what Draw My Life is? And I was like, no. And so she showed me, and it's a video meme where people, sort of give an autobiographical, literally sketch of their lives. And I was like, well, you can think of a better exercise for an actor to get into character and come up with a backstory. And so we did this Draw My Life thing, which is actually, you can see it on the Kurt's World page. It's the first post. And it's like a 18-minute video that Joe and myself and Honor were sort of coming up with the material on the fly. And then he was just drawing it, and he'd draw it. And then we do the voiceover on my iPhone voice memos. And then later that night when he left, I edited it, and I sent it to him, and I'm like, what do you think? And yeah, that's just me and Joe. And then we'd walk around my neighborhood, and he'd do like a neighborhood tour and like review the neighborhood and stuff, just things that, or vape reviews, we do really vape reviews. And none of that, besides the Draw My Life, those early ones didn't end up in the film because we weren't doing the character right, in a way. Like Joe still hadn't found it, and his look wasn't right, but it was the foundation from which we built the rest of the social media videos, which do end up in the film, which we shot during, like kind of in the in-betweens of principal photography. Joe and I would actually do it. And in fact, I also made a TikTok account for the promotion of the film, which is like even more successful. It has like 200,000 followers, but it's way less narratively cohesive, and it's way less of a kind of like, augmented reality game than Instagram. But there's a video on that has 3 million views, which is basically on day 3 of principal photography, when it was our first car shooting day. There were a lot of technical difficulties with the monitoring of all the different cameras in the car. We pulled over in a parking lot where there was a Kohl's, like the Kohl's, like TJ Maxx, Marshall's type place. And so I just said to Joe, I was like, why don't you go in there in character as Kurt and just kind of, maybe you're thinking of getting into a different outfit, because this will be, I was like, this will be your first ride, like right before your first ride, you're in this outfit, this is your look. So maybe you're thinking of swapping outfits. Anyway, so we go in there, blah, blah, blah. He's saying some funny stuff. He's a great improver. I'm like kind of watching him.
And he's all on camera the whole time doing it?
He's all on his iPhone. So, I mean, for anyone who's like listening, let me just say this flat out. The entire movie is shot on iPhones, GoPros, police body cams, Sony body cams, surveillance cameras. There's no conventional cameras. There's no 3516 Alexa Red. That's no, actually there is Red, but it's a diegetic camera in one scene, stand-up comedy scene. And it's used diegetically because it's supposed to be like a broadcast camera for a stand-up comedy live stream. Anyway, so Joe and I went in there, and he's doing funny stuff, and I'm pretending to be like a guy who works at Kohl's, who's saying like, you can't film in here, dude. And he's like, da-da-da. And then I saw in the rack a Steve Harrington Stranger Things t-shirt, like literally 30 of them all in a rack. And I said, Joe, you gotta go over and interact with this fucking shirt. And he picked it up and he's saying, oh, I watched this with my cousin. Like, I love the show, but I don't really know how I feel about this character. Not my favorite. And, and then that went viral, right? And it's not actually in the film, but it was part of our promotional campaign. So anyway, like, that's just the thing. If you're going through technical difficulties, obviously, if you're the person who can solve them, go solve them. But if you can't solve them and someone else is working on it, figure out what else you can do with your actors, especially if they're game to create and to collaborate, which Joe was very much game.
That sounds like it must have been pretty fun to make that, just to have the ability to go out and shoot stuff with your actor at any time, pretty much.
Totally. And I think, I would encourage every director to know like how every job functions on a set. And like, obviously I don't pretend to know how to operate an Alexa camera or whatever, but I know how to shoot on a Red, or, like I can make that look pretty good. And obviously I can make an iPhone look really good. and you know what? Joe can too. I mean, Joe and Sasheer and David Arquette, they operated almost all of the stuff where you see them in selfie mode, definitely. And oftentimes when you see them in revert, like, facing outward, they're really good because we're all used to doing this anyway.
But what about convincing reps to get, like, yes, you can connect with an actor, and a lot of actors are very kind and giving, but like once the agent or manager finds out that their actor is contributing to the cinematography of the film, like, are there any did you run into any issues with reps is what I'm really asking? No,
everyone's really cool. I mean, like, they all read the script. Maybe I'm just really naive, like in my previous films, like any actor I worked with who had reps, I didn't contact them ever. So like I worked with Jack Kilmer, I worked with John Ennis, I worked with people who, Kate Shield was the star of my film, A Wonderful Cloud. She had reps. She did not tell her reps she was making that film. Like, why are you telling your reps you're making a movie for $50,000? You're not gonna, because whatever, like
they're not gonna get anything out of it. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately the movie did well. It went to South by, and people have seen it. I just didn't do that, and I didn't know there's anything wrong with doing that. And and like, this is my first SAG film, and it's a non-union film. Still, this was a non-union film. I don't know. I just didn't go to the reps. I just, Joe and I, when we were kind of talking about the role, I got his number. I said, well, do you want to do this? Post Sundance and stuff, it's a little bit more complicated. We have been going through reps and blah, blah, blah. And like, I understand that probably in retrospect, looking back on it, I was really demanding in a way, maybe annoying in a way, but that's okay. I could think, if you're really passionate about what you're doing, that should be like contagious, like everyone should. I mean, you have to be respectful of people's time and energy and effort. But if you care about something the most, and you are putting in a lot of fucking time and effort, and you are not misguided, and you feel like you're doing something, like I feel like this movie means something. I mean, maybe it doesn't mean anything to like the New York Times or something, but like with the movie, I was trying to like really make an impactful statement and also make like a piece of meaningful entertainment, I think that's contagious. And so people want to participate in that and people want to contribute to that. And, you know, maybe if Joe was like way more seasoned, and maybe if this wasn't his first feature, and maybe if blah, 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 or I let my producers be more participatory at the beginning, none of that would have happened. But because I'm naive and maybe Joe is just naive or whatever, it did. And I don't think either of us really regrets it. I think we're both so happy to have found the character through that and then to be able to use those materials.
I just want to say, I don't think it's naive. I think that's how we should be making art, but I think the system blocks us from interacting organically in that way. So I'm just amazed that you were able to skirt the system and the agents weren't like surveying you and like stopping you.
Let me just say for the record, Joe's agents and management and stuff are absolutely like sweethearts. They like I think if we had gone through them, potentially it would have been even easier, because Joe is super dependable, but he's also like a musician. And one thing about musicians is that they're like hard to reach a little bit, you know? Whereas I think if I had, before principal, I said, hey, like I'm going to need, 5 days or something with Joe just to really get into character. And these are the days I want. It would have just happened. In reality, it was like me kind of texting him a little bit like, hey, are you busy? Like, that's what I mean by being like annoying and stuff. His reps are super, Matt and Molly, and I think he has a few others. They love the movie, and and were super nice to me all the time. But I agree with you that the system is it's created to extract maximum profit for all of these sort of non-creative participants. And if you're lucky, the creative participants, and that's what turned me off about it, for the second I got to Los Angeles. And, people come up with their alternatives to it. And obviously there are film industries in New York and Austin and other pockets of the country. And I don't necessarily know that those systems are better. I mean, I don't know that they don't necessarily emulate the model that's created by Hollywood, or that is, like in France or, Hong Kong or whatever, or Italy. Every country and place has its own models, but they're all about sort of like extracting maximum profit from people's creative output. And I would just say the best thing you can do, as long as you can do it, is to make movies with people that you like and people that you trust and people that, hopefully you're friends with. In that way, at least, like everyone's heart is in the right place. And, it's not like just like a weird, like circle jerk with the lawyers or something like that.
So I want to go back to something that you said earlier, like kind of in the beginning of the conversation, where you're talking about working with a bigger crew, working with producers, working with an AD for the first time, and then having to like kind of change your style of directing to kind of fit, this more organized, bigger model, I guess. Maybe not organized is the right word, but like, you know what I'm saying? Can you just talk about how you managed to do that, and like what allowed you to accept this different process?
I don't know, just because like you want to respect people, and I mean, frankly, when someone comes on board, and the thing about crew members, right, unlike a director, they're not with the project from like the beginning to end. I mean, producers sometimes are, but what I'm trying to say is that basically every single crew member on a crew will have done 5 times more than any director on a crew, because they go from project to project as DP or as the sound person or as the script supervisor or whatever. And so you really want to yield to people's like experience sets and their knowledge sets. And, hopefully you find the people who are just really good at their job. That's kind of my mentality. Like, oh, okay, well, this person knows what they're doing. And if it felt to me like, oh, I disagree with, the fact that this is the schedule, or I disagree with like how the day is going to go, or I disagree with like this article of clothing that we decided on a week ago because I was tired and I said, yeah, that looks perfect. And now I don't. Or the location, like there were a lot of debates about location that we had to go through between myself and the producers and the line producer and the location manager. So I don't know, you just sort of like figure out who is making sense and when they're making sense, and you yield to that. And then if you feel like someone isn't making sense, you just have to speak up. Otherwise it'll kind of gnaw away at you inside, my first film, Zeros and Ones, which was, much smaller film, but also about computer screens and trying to tell a narrative story through apps and programs and sort of computer language. We shot that movie with a small crew, and then my imagination was like, oh, okay, so now we shot this 5-camera movie where I'm going to have a bunch of embedded videos to emulate sort of like, YouTube and MySpace and all these things. And we'll just get maybe some grad students at Cal Arts to animate it, like maybe like 2 or 3 who really think this is cool, a cool project or something. And it ended up requiring close to 40 volunteers over the course of 2.5 years. And it was a really collaborative effort, and people were truly volunteering, which was amazing and like inspiring and like made me feel so lucky and also kind of like horrible about myself, because people were working really hard for nothing. So part of that is learning that like people will work hard and contribute if they feel like they have authorship. And that's an important lesson for any person collaborating and any sort of leader and any sort of, person making a project that requires communal activity. And I realized another part of that equation is just trusting people. So on Zeros and Ones, if people were graphic designing apps and games and stuff in a way that didn't exactly sit well with me, I would sort of try to direct them, but I would also try to say, like, you know what, that's their voice. And I just sort of early on conceded that the movie would become a pastiche of different voices, and that would work to the benefit of this sort of like anthropology of the internet. And so I allowed, all the artists sort of pursue their own muse when it came to designing and animating, even though I was like, working out the timing and stuff with them. Anyway, all of this is just to say that you have to trust people to do the thing that they're good at. You have to let people feel invested in their skill set. And then you also have to kind of butt in when it doesn't mesh together. Not necessarily mesh together with your vision, but mesh together with what's going to make the project work. But yeah, that's something I learned in my first movie. And so now when I jumped ahead, 10 years later to Spree, and I was working with a bunch of people again, I was like, even though I'm such a control freak, so in the edit room, like, if you talk to people who I did post with, like they go, that's a much more like highly scrutinized and contentious place, because I have an editorial background and I know how to edit and all this. Does that sort of answer your question of how I felt comfortable?
A little bit, yeah. Just like sometimes you let go and you let them run the show and do the things that they want to do, and sometimes you come in and be the director and say, no, I have to have it this way, which totally makes sense. And I mean, I think deciding when to do that is the tough time. It's like, when is it the time to put down the gavel and be like, no, it has to be like this because it won't work any other way or whatever,
I think generally speaking, I would say generally speaking, if someone says, this is bad, what you're thinking of doing is bad, Eugene, you need to really, really consider what they're saying. Like, people do not flag shit, and people do not fight with a director, or disagree with a director unless they truly believe what they're saying, and it's always worth consideration. And oftentimes what happens is you do not do exactly what they're suggesting, but you also do not do exactly what you originally had in mind. You find some sort of synthesis of the two ideas, and oftentimes that becomes better. The two things that I really fought on in the movie that, I did not budge on were the freeway chase, which was obviously one of the big ticket items, and crashing into the house at the end.
Yeah.
They wanted to cancel the freeway chase and the crash, and they wanted it to crash into a garage instead of a house. And I just thought it was so important that all of like the sort of domestic, sort of space was where it all kind of went down in that last scene that, was hopefully funny and scary and kind of sad, with the dad and with the mom and stuff. And the freeway chase, obviously, it's like, you need that for the fucking trailer. You need that. If you're going to sell this as a thriller, as a car movie, you're making a fucking car movie. You need a chase, and that you can't cut that. Like, and ultimately, I think it was a lot less money than anyone would imagine. Although I think, the line producer, obviously she had it figured out pretty accurately, but like, if I asked you guys how much you think that costs, I'm sure you would say a number that's much higher than it did. You have to shut down an entire freeway. You have to have 20 police officers. You have 25 stunt drivers each driving stunt cars that you rent for the day. You have a biscuit rig, which is like a special type of trailer where someone is connected to the car outside of the car and driving it for the driver, for the actor while they're driving. I don't know. It's anyway, like thinking about the making of that is giving me a headache, but we were able to do it in a very efficient way, which was I think cool and lucky, and kudos to everyone who figured it out.
Speaking of smashing the car into the house, like, did you actually just drive a car into a house? Is that what you guys did? Or
well, that's what I wanted to do. I said, can't we find like some house that is, you know, like in some area where they built these houses like right before the financial crisis, and now it's been abandoned for 5 years and someone's about to destroy it and no one lives there, and can we just set design that and crash into that? And everyone's like, that is really dangerous and stupid. And I was like, okay, so what are we gonna do? You know, we scouted a location that looked from the exterior like what we wanted, and had a field, which was great because I knew, you know, we need the showdown in the field at the end, and we also need a place where he's setting up his cameras at the beginning of the movie, which, by the way, we shot that the same day, right? Like the beginning of the day is the intro of the movie where he's setting up his cameras and all that, and then second half of the day is the showdown with Jesse in the field where, you know, he tries to run her over and blah, blah. And actually, you know, what we did in between those two things is we shot like 70% of the Kurt social media material, because the interior of that house, that was another part of our location that was perfect. And the person who owned that house had a teenage son. And we literally just went into the teenage son's room, got rid of anything that had a logo, put in a few little posters, and now it's Kurt's room. And literally Kurt is using that kid's headphones, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so we, you know, just did it there. Joe and I did it there for fucking 2 hours. And then they came in and they're like, lunch. And I'm like, he's doing a room tour. Like, stop, you know, like, don't interrupt this guy. You know, he's a fucking genius. Let him do it. And then we'll have lunch in 2 minutes. I mean, I know it's, you know, these are all important union legal regulations, and obviously people need to eat on time and all that, but like, do not interrupt like a 5-minute take at minute 3.5 of like someone doing something amazing. So we drove that car all the way up and as close as we could safely. We had a great stunt supervisor, Casey Adams, who was doing the driving, as close as we could to the actual house. And then our production designer, Carlos, and his team, they reconstructed the exterior of the house on a stage at a place called Skid Row Sets, I believe. We then, like 2 weeks later, crashed the car into that exterior and, you know, cut them together in a way that I think looks pretty seamless.
Beautiful. I if you told me you'd crash into a real house, I would have believed you.
Yeah, I think most people watch it, they believe it. And there is like a little bit of compositing work as the VFX artist did to help out, and color correction helps out. And then my editor and I, we put a speed ramp into a zoom up and a speed ramp into the actual shot that wasn't on a stage to help, you know. And then if you cut fast enough, no one sees that stuff.
So what's the first film you ever made, and how do you feel about it now?
Zeros and Ones. I feel good. It was a screen movie where I was trying to revolutionize cinema language, because I felt like someone has to do this, you know, make a movie that has emails and multiple angles and all that on screen at the same time. I was upset because no one saw it. Played at one film festival, and it weirdly did get a week-long run in New York, which got us a crazy good New York Times review, but then nothing happened with it. And actually only really lately, it's been rediscovered by, weirdly, some super fans in Australia. So now I have like this very small that movie has a very small fervent fan base in Australia, where they've screened it like 4 times in the last like year and a half. It has flaws, but I think it's, especially in light of Spree, which is basically like that movie revamped with like a genre and like phones. It's worth checking out. It's definitely interesting.
What's the best filmmaking advice you've ever received?
I can't remember any specific advice, but like when I was sort of like bumming around desperately asking people to get me like, you know, PA jobs when I first moved to LA, someone called me and they said, I have a job for you. And I said, like, is this Eugene from the bar? I said, yeah, like I have a job for you. I'm like, that's amazing. They're like, it doesn't pay any money. And I was like, that's not a job. They're like, it's working, you're working on an Agnes Varda movie. And I said, okay, I will obviously do for free. And so then I PA'd on Agnes's movie, and during the wrap party, we just talked. I was just like, why am I here with the crew? I need to talk with her. She's alone at the bar. drinking by herself. I was like, I'm going to go hang out with Anya's. And so we just talked movies and we talked life and whatever. And then the next morning she called. I also like had a DVD in my car in case I ran into Brad Pitt at a party. I could give it to him of like my little movies that I made by myself. I gave it to her, which is maybe as good, if not better than Brad Pitt. And she called me the next morning and said, Eugene, do you think maybe you and we can go do a little shoot together? And I said, to shoot with you? That would be amazing. That would be incredible. I'm like, when are you thinking? She's like, in 30 minutes. And I like literally lived like 45 minutes away from where she was staying. And it was like 6 a.m. and I hadn't even got the crust out of my eyes. I just popped in the car. I drove over there. And then she and we shot for 5 days together. And it was really amazing and really inspiring. And, you know, she was on set carrying as much equipment as any grip, walking faster than anyone, and always looking for an opportunity to shoot something, even while we were changing locations. And, you know, it's a little different because it was a documentary, Beaches of Agnes, that was the film. And then working with her, it was just, she would find creativity anywhere she looked. She would find something to turn into a piece of art or a question to ask that would be exciting and interesting for a viewer. You know, she always was thinking about the viewers, was always thinking about ways to, you know, pose questions and present the world in a fascinating and entertaining and thoughtful and poetic way. And she was just driven by all of these different considerations, but like had like the artistry of storytelling in mind. And just watching her work was like, you know, really invaluable. And being able to collaborate with her is obviously an enormous privilege. And, you know, I think in the last 10 years, probably she has finally achieved the status in the States and the rest of the world that she really deserves, because she's kind of an unparalleled filmmaker in her ability to synthesize personal, philosophical, artistic ideas with interesting modes of mass storytelling that she kind of came up with on her own.
Do you have a goal as a filmmaker?
Goal? Yeah, I would like to make films that, you know, really start conversations. Like, I grew up in a moment when I'm 34, films really were like kind of very relevant and primary to cultural conversations. And as I've grown up, I've seen films become very marginalized in sort of mainstream conversations, unless you're talking about like tentpole, like kind of superhero type stuff. And I think part of that obviously has to do with viewing habits and stuff and all that, but it also has to do with the responsibility of filmmakers to make films that are like meaningful and push forward cinema, but also have to be fucking entertaining. You know, I can't tell you how many films I see at film festivals and ultimately released as art house films that are extremely boring and suck and like ruin people's goodwill towards cinema. We are not at a point in history where we can take for granted that people will care. So my goal as a filmmaker is, I think, to make films that hopefully formally and artistically and philosophically are saying really interesting things, but also make some sort of impact on the culture as, you know, like a piece of entertainment. And I think that balance is like the type of filmmakers that I like historically. And so that's kind of my goal.
If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself?
Ask people for help more. I think I was really scared, kind of like the few kind of contacts I had when I had first moved to LA that did have some connection to filmmaking. I was really scared to ask them for help because I was like, why would they want to help me? Like, why? I was scared to annoy them and bug them and stuff. And now that I have experience, that I've made films, generally speaking, unless I'm crazy busy or someone seems like unstable and psychotic and they ask me for help, I will help them. And it's a pleasure for me to, you know, help someone if I feel like their heart's in the right place and they're, you know, making something that's really meaningful to them. And so I say, if you're starting out, and you know, ask people, and also ask your friends for help. If again, it's just sort of thing like, if your intentions are true and like hopefully you're not doing anything that's too fucked up, you know, people will help you.
Lastly, is making movies hard?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's very challenging. Like, obviously, you know, there are things that are more meaningful in this world for people to dedicate their time to. And obviously they're also like, and it's also an incredible privilege to be able to say like, I make movies, or like, I made a movie and please watch it. or like say, hey, a bunch of people are helping me to make a film, or a bunch of people are getting paid to help me make a film. All of those things are extremely, honors. It's like an honor to be able to say any of those things. But with that being said, it is really hard because you have an enormous responsibility in terms of the work you have to put in to make something that is watchable and good and meaningful. It's hard, but it's worth it, I think.
Awesome. Where should people go if they want to watch Spree, or if they want to find out more about you? Where should they head?
So if they're in the US, it's out at drive-ins and on VOD, and you can find out more info on spreefilm.com, at kurtzworld96 on Instagram to get the sort of, it's almost like a second movie making that account. So you could give it a lot of cool and fun backstory. And me, everybodyloves.me is my website, and there's links to all my other movies on there. It's great talking with both of you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Eugene.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Eugene Kotlyarenko for being on the show, and to Priscilla Rios of KWPR for setting this whole thing up. Check out our website, makingmoviesishard.com, where you can find links to the things we talked about in this episode. If you want to get in contact with us, we've said it before, we'll say it again. Send an email to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at MMIH Podcast. I am Liz Manischel on Twitter and Liz Manischel Film on Instagram. Alrik, where are you?
I am Alrik B on Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, that's pretty much it.
And he will accept your friendship. Please, if you like the show, tell a friend, help us get the word out, leave a review, and last but not least, thanks to our producers, Greg Holtzman, Joshua Sterling Bragg, editor Colby Crow, the whole Bloodstream Media team for making this episode possible, and we will talk to y'all next week. Can you hear my child screaming from the other room?
Just a little.
It's nap time, so he's like, I'm not having it, Liz.
He doesn't want to go to bed?
No.